something will happen. This is the last decade where we can still avoid some of the catastrophic consequences. Has not really been totally successful, destroying the social, the cultural, the economic. Hi, I'm Markku Wilenius, your traveling futurist. Today, I'm going to talk about the Club of Rome. Many of you have never heard probably anything about the Club of Rome, but Club of Rome is an organization that has been working on global sustainability for the last 50 years, and actually even more than that. As an organization, we can classify it as a non-governmental organization. It's been often rated to be one of the most influential, if not the influential, particularly when it comes to drive the issues that determine the long-term future of the humankind. First, a little bit of the history of the Club of Rome. Now, back in 1960s, there was Italian businessman, very successful businessman, that has been working in many leading Italian companies such as Olivetti and Fiat, and become the chairman, the leading figures. Now, at some point in time, he started to have some doubts about the development path and where does this lead to. This was the tenet that has been built particularly after the Second World War, the development idea, which was essentially that let's bring the same level of wealth and what is called the third world country, what is called the developed country. All of these terms are now very much outdated, of course. So he became concerned that if this type of the development path is to continue decades after decades, something will happen that would be actually destroying the foundation of the societies themselves. He started to collect a small group of people that shared the same type of the concern. Then they formed this organization in Rome, 1968. And some years after, they came across some of the work that had been done then in MIT, in Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where they had a laboratory that had started, actually a first of its kind, to develop a model of global flows and stocks to understand how the world works, how the world that we have created here by our culture, using technology, having a human, economic, financial flows, cultural flows of all kinds. They started to model the long-term future of the humankind based on the data that we're able to gather at that time about the population growth, economic growth, pollution, extraction of natural and mineral resources, and so forth. And they came up with a conclusion that indeed something rather notorious can be at the end of the tunnel. They actually built 12 different scenarios based on different assumptions. What might happen in the world 100 years from then, which was stretching from early 1970s to early 2070s. So about the 50 years from now. They came this conclusion that somewhere after 50 years or so, we start to see the first serious signs of deterioration of the system, of the system's base, if we continue this way. When this report, which name was Limits to Growth, when this report actually came out, it was with a great publicity. And large part of that publicity actually came because there were a lot of opponents, particularly among the industry, saying that there are no limits to growth, that we can grow endlessly and we can use as much as we want our natural resources, and technology will take care all the ramification of this development taking care of all the pollution and so forth and so forth. So we should not worry about that. But of course, there were also a lot of people and some politicians and some business people that took this message seriously, because this was not really the first time that this type of the warning signal has been spelled out. Rachel Carlson came already 10 years back into publicity with her book on Silent Spring, that she was exploring the impacts of the pesticides and herbicides and other chemicals that were used then in the agriculture. But this, of course, was a much larger intake, this Club of Rome report, that had a kind of a global reach, and the analysis was for the first time in the history of science a truly global analysis based on the understanding of the flows and the stocks of the system. So it was a systems-based analysis. Now, ever since that, club started to work on these topics, producing reports, talking to politicians and economic elite, trying to influence in such a way as to steer the development into a more sustainable pattern. And today we know that this work of Club of Rome or other parties that have been on the same front has not really been totally successful, because by and large we are still continuing this notorious path. Club of Rome was focused on the work of getting the message across that for the long term we really need to make the shift. And as I said, even if this message has not created the desired impact, it certainly has created an impact. Today the same work still goes on with the club. Making reports, trying to have a positive impact on decision making on the various fronts are the measures that Club of Rome is doing, and it's doing that through the work of the individuals that work for the club. So basically, club is that it has about 100 members, sort of international members, and then it has national chapters. National chapters are the ones that mostly sort of localize the activities and try to have an impact on the more sort of a local level. Today, the focus of the club is pretty much focused on what can be called a planetary emergency, because today we know that in fact we are in a state of planetary emergency, particularly when we look at what do we know about the climate change, what do we know about the changing of the weather patterns, extreme weathers, extension of the droughts as we have currently, for instance, in East Africa, persistent drought of many years. But of course, we have a lot of other events that are occurring around the world, proving the case that the climate change is ongoing and it's destroying the social, the cultural, the economic basis of the countries. And when we let that go rampant, this is just the beginning of the destruction that the climate change can cause us. No, the theory of the climate change back in 1970s was not there, but it was already known by that time that the pollution levels were harmful, that the destruction of nature because of the extraction of the natural resources is real. But of course, today, with the types of the advanced models that we have, projections about the future are much more reliable. But it must be said also that it's quite astonishing how accurate actually some of the scenarios that limits to growth included, how close to reality they were at the time. The question is that what is going to happen in this kind of a crucial decade that we are now running, third year of 2020s. What we need to be thinking is that, well, this is the last decade where we can still avoid some of the catastrophic consequences if we make the turn. So the turning point is really needed. Club of Rome, which is really committed for the global sustainability, is one of those organizations that is fully devoted to not only to talk about the perils of the current way of development, but also to talk about the alternatives to economy, the alternatives to our relationship with nature, and alternatives how we should actually look to the future, because that makes, of course, all the difference. How do we look to the future? How do we see our options? And how do we strategize the ways that we can reach those alternative futures which are desperately needed? And I think it's not so much anymore the question of the knowledge itself, it's a question of the awareness. I think also Club of Rome has become very much like a awareness raising organization that tries to bring the type of awareness that we cannot just postpone these changes that are necessary. We need to get rid of the oil, we need to get rid of the fossil fuels, we need to understand how to collaborate with nature instead of extracting, and we need to find another alternative ways how we actually indicate and evaluate the progress of our economies and societies, and GDP is very poor measure for that type of development. So there is still a lot of work for the Club of Rome to be done, and the Club of Rome itself has also rejuvenated its faces. It's much more global than it used to be decades ago. There is a distribution of representatives coming from all parts of the world, and ample also representation of different genders. So it has become to look much more like the world, which is important for the Club of Rome if it's going to be successful in its ambitions. So this is in a nutshell what the Club of Rome is and what does it aim to, and you can of course find much more about it in the Club of Rome website, which is easy to be found. I would also say that yes, I'm a member of the Club of Rome and I have been working there now for about 20 years. Subscribe to my channel and see other related sustainability videos and learn more about the future.